that the drug companies are charging? Is it morally acceptable to say, I have a drug here that can cure you, save your life, but I'm sorry you can't afford the $50,000 that it cost? Is that the moral values of the United States of America? And I would contrast that attitude that we see today from Moderna and virtually all the other drug companies with what Jonas Salk said when he invented the polio vaccine that had such a profound impact. And you know what he got for inventing the polio vaccine? He got nothing. And he was proud of it. He gave a gift to the world that saved God knows how many lives. So I think we need to do some moral thinking about the role of the drug companies in our society, and I hope this committee will get into that. And with that, let me give the mic over to Senator Cassidy.
Thank you, Chair Sanders. You know, I'm a physician. I worked for over 2 decades in a hospital for the uninsured, those poorly insured on Medicaid. So I'm very familiar with this issue. We share the concerns. Americans pay too much for prescription drugs and the medicines we depend upon. So today we're asking questions of Mr. Bancel. What price does Moderna plan to charge when the vaccine goes to the commercial market? And how did the company arrive at that price? And why is it different than the price that the government was charged? Now, Moderna announced recently it'll provide the vaccine at no cost to patients. How will the company implement this? They are fair questions, and hopefully at the end of this hearing, we will have a better understanding of these issues. But let's just kind of think about the process here. The title is Taxpayers Paid Billions for It, so why would Moderna consider quadrupling the price of the COVID vaccine? Now, frankly, this presumes guilt in its title before we have learned. I'm a physician. I don't leap to a diagnosis before I take a careful history and physical. This is more like a show trial and a public shaming than a fact-finding mission. And it should be the goal of this committee to first fact-find before we attempt to hold someone guilty. The chair speaks of corporate greed in the context of over 1 million Americans who tragically died during the pandemic. I don't see the link. I just don't. The vaccine was available. As soon as it was available, it was implemented and lives began to be saved. It's hard to say that corporate greed was implicated before the vaccine was actually passed. It's important for us not to allow rhetoric to distort our analysis of the situation. This should be a fact-finding hearing. I do see a link between millions of lives saved because of the quick development of a vaccine made here in the United States. COVID-19 cost the U.S. economy an estimated $26 billion a day between 2020 and 2021. In this light, a study by the International Monetary Fund showed that Operation Warp Speed and the taxpayer dollars spent to support the vaccines would have paid for itself had it cut the duration of the pandemic by 12 hours. By 12 hours. We got a bargain here. An expensive bargain? No, a cheap bargain relative to that which it costs us every day. And considering that the initial estimates for the development of a vaccine were 3 to 10 years, thanks to Operation Warp Speed, private industry, American capitalism, things that we had done as a committee on a bipartisan basis to give tools to FDA and BARDA, the world's leading COVID vaccines were developed and distributed in less than 1 year, and taxpayer returns on investment were incalculable. Now, it's easy to criticize and decry capitalism, but it is the reason that we developed multiple world-leading vaccines in 10 months, and it is the reason that hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans are still alive today. This would not be had it not been for this process and for these vaccines. But cost is an issue. Let's just not paper over that. I can criticize the process, but I agree, cost is an issue. And during my decades treating the uninsured, I had patients who could not afford the drugs prescribed. And my nurse and I would sit on the phone for sometimes hours with insurance companies trying to get the authorization so that they could get their drugs. But I've also seen when a drug has not been invented, so to speak, where there are no other options, when there was a death sentence or a life of chronic disease because a medicine to treat the chronic illness or condition did not exist. Then maybe a few years later, maybe many years later, I'd be with a different patient in a different exam room with the same diagnosis, but now that drug had been invented, and a formerly fatal disease was now treatable and a relic of the past. Why? Because in the interim, treatments developed for their condition. Now, it's easy to put the COVID vaccine as one of these success stories, but it happened over 10 months. At first, we had no way to prevent. 10 months later, there it was. It seems like we in this committee need to keep the bigger picture in mind.